Today I am brewing a super simple no-frills lager, and I have some catching up to do with everybody, and it all starts now. Welcome to Big Monster Brewing, the Anvil Foundry Brewing Edition. I am Matt, and for the first time during these whole shelter-in-place orders, stay-at-home, whatever your area is calling it, I have nothing in my fermentation fridge at the moment. I've been brewing a lot, like I'm sure a lot of you have during all this, and I've been keeping the temperature range, or at least picking strains, I should say, that ferment in the temperature range of 65 to 68, so I can constantly rotate one in and out and yada 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 through the whole process. Had a week where I had no star sand, had to skip brewing, and now it's empty. So I have the opportunity to hand pick a specific temperature and a strain of yeast because there'll be nothing else in that refrigerator for at least a week, maybe 2 weeks. So I am going to try a lager, and I'm kind of wincing because I have not had a lot of successful lagers. In fact, I haven't had, if I've had one success with a lager, if you count a Märzen as a lager, which is in the lager family. All my other attempts I've never been happy with. Nothing that's made anyone sick, but nothing that anyone has come back for seconds on. So I'm going to try a lager again, and I am going to keep it really simple. And I'm going with kind of the American light to American lager style. And the reason I say that is because I didn't quite want to make a light, and I didn't want to overdo it and make a really heavy beer because I kind of want to dial in that lager flavor. So to keep things simple, it all starts with a very simple grain bill. The grist for this lager is 46% pale malt, 46% Pilsner malt, and 8% flaked rice. That's it, just those three ingredients as far as the grain bill goes. I'm brewing a 2.5 gallon batch size on the 6.5 gallon Anvil Foundry. To start the entire brewing process, I mashed in and rest at 152 degrees Fahrenheit, recirculating the whole time during this mash. Held that temperature at 50 minutes, then I mashed out for 10 minutes at 168 degrees, and then finally I sparged everything with 1 gallon of water that I heated up to 168 degrees Fahrenheit. At the end of the entire mashing process and everything into the boil kettle, I had a pre-boil gravity of 1.030, which was my exact goal, so that was pretty cool. I cranked the foundry up to the boil setting, and while I waited, I got together my boil additions. Now, simple as the grain bill was, these boil additions are even simpler. It is one hop added twice, and that is 8.5 IBUs of Tettnanger at 60 minutes, and another 1.5 IBUs of Tettnanger again at 5 minutes. Along with the hop additions, I also added yeast nutrients at the 10-minute mark, and this little bit of a Whirlfloc tablet at 2 minutes. Now, getting to that part where I said I had to catch up with all of you. Last video I made before taking that break and coming back with the Big Brew Day was the second attempt at an old ale. It was called Ogre 2. I renamed it Ogre the Second in that video, but I never followed up on it. Well, I mean, I never posted a follow-up on it. I did make a video for it that I don't know what happened to the footage. It was the same camera I was using for everything else. This footage just looked awful. So I didn't really want to post that terrible quality of a video. And at the time of that tasting, I wasn't really thrilled about that beer. But something has prompted me, that's a good way to say it, since then to revisit it. And I'll get to that in just a couple of minutes. So I do have a bottle here, one of the very last bottles of the Ogre 2, Ogre the Second, whatever last name I gave it on the last video. And I do have one of my style cheat sheets here to give it its proper review, follow-up. That's a good way to say it. So let's get to it. I won't make it as long as my BJCP style videos, but I will make sure it's nicely represented. So there we got a nice hiss, a little bit of gas coming off there. Going to give it a very small pour, but aggressive. So we got some carbonation. Let's take a look at the cheat sheet here. It says appearance, light amber to dark reddish brown. I don't know how well it's coming up on camera, but that is, I'd say, the color here that I'm looking at. And a moderate low creamy to light tan, or cream to light tan head, and it's more towards the cream color if it's not coming up on camera. So aroma, we're looking for multi-sweet and fruity esters, which is the exact thing I just got off when I sampled the aroma before I tasted it. Complex blend of dried fruits, vinous, caramelly, molasses, nutty, toffee, light treacle, specialty malts. I don't know if every single one of those are there, but there's definitely there's definitely complexity to it. There's certainly the caramel flavor, and there's a kind of that date and raisin, maybe even a little bit of a prune aroma to it too. Actually, quite nice. Flavor, medium to high malt character, a luscious malt complexity, nutty, caramelly, and or molasses-like, moderate to high fruity esters. Again, a lot to take in just a couple minutes here, but let's see what we got. I'd say just looking at that cheat sheet, everything but nutty. I don't quite get a nutty, and maybe a little bit of the finish now that I'm saying it. It is incredibly complex. And my point is, it's far more complex than my first tasting. Turns out what this needed was some age. And about 4 months after that tasting of the last video I made that I didn't like, I had entered it into a contest just to get the feedback on it. And lo and behold, it ended up taking a gold medal for that category, which was 17, the Strong British Ale category. So I honestly put this in just for feedback to see how I can improve it. When I got some experience judging comments on what they thought of it, I needed to give it a second try. And the biggest factor between my first tasting and this tasting is time. So on one hand, apologies for being so late in this review, but on that other hand, I'm glad I was able to revisit it almost a year later because it is a far different beer than it was in that first taste. At the end of the entire boil, I chilled the wort down below 90 degrees before I transferred it into the carboy. Then I added a tilt hydrometer and used that to check the temperature as I put the wort into the fridge. I wanted to chill it down to about 50 degrees before I pitched the yeast. Then I took a final gravity reading and I hit 1.040, and this was an important number to me because it is the cutoff of the high range of an American light lager in the BJCP guidelines, and it is the low end, the starting number of the OG for an American lager. I really wanted to hit that mark to decide if I end up liking this beer, which way do I want to go? Do I want to increase it just a little bit more to make it an American lager, or do I want to pull back a little bit of the malts to make it an American light lager? And normally those kind of plans I make never work out, so I was at least pretty ecstatic about this part of the brew. After the wort dropped to 50 degrees, I did rehydrate the yeast. I did go with a dry yeast. I had this on hand for, I'd say about 2 months just before all this shelter-in-place started, and had no liquid strains to propagate in my yeast bank, so I went with what I had. And then I pitched the yeast and waited. And this dry yeast took off in about, I'd say 20 hours. In 20 hours, I had some major activity in that carboy. After the first 2 days of that major activity, some of the biggest activity I've seen during this entire brewing I've done the past 2 months, I replaced the blow-off tube with an airlock. The airlock kept popping for another good 3 or 4 days. Finally, by the 8th to 9th day, it slowed down to almost no activity. And on that 10th day, I cold crashed it, then kegged it, then carbonated it with the Blickman Quick Carb, and got it on tap ready to taste. It is 5 weeks later, and I finally get to talk about this beer. And I think the first thing to mention, and the first thing that stands out, and I'm going to wipe the condensation off, and I hope it's coming out on camera. I can't see what the camera's seeing, but how clear this beer is. I've done a lot of different things to try to clear beer. In fact, let me turn it all the way around, because if it's coming out clear, you should be able to see those letters just fine backwards in the camera. I've done a lot to try to clear beer, and I don't think I've ever had it this clear. And what this comes down to is this time I used Biofine, and it sat for 3 weeks. It took me 3 weeks to get to this point of tasting it. Time to taste. How did we do with this lager? I don't know why I'm saying we. I think that's like my safety net in case I screw this up. So first the aroma. And I did notice this pouring. There's a corniness to it, which it's definitely DMS. And I think right off the bat I know why, and I'll talk about that here very shortly. There is a little allowed in this style, but this is like a little more than a little. I wouldn't call it a lot, but it's a little more than a little, if that makes sense. So I can absolutely smell a little bit of that DMS, but after that, I kind of get that almost sulfur kind of lager yeast smell, that distinctive lager yeast aroma that you get with a lager. That's there as well. That's about the only two things there. I'm not getting a whole lot of maltiness. Definitely no like biscuity or any kind of multi-grain from it. Just those two aromas, those characteristics. We've talked about the clarity, the color's right there. I think it's time to taste. Now, surprisingly, actually, that corniness, that probable DMS, is not as prevalent as I thought it was going to be. I definitely taste it. It's also in the forefront of my mind to find, but even with that, it's not that strong. There's a little bit of it. This, taste-wise, is what I would consider a little, maybe in the guidelines. But the aroma, that's a little much, but more on the taste. I will say it's extremely dry. There is almost no sweet to it whatsoever, which I was a little worried about, because the yeast like took off and was done in basically a week, if not actually less time than that. And I was a little worried that maybe the yeast petered out and it was under attenuated. Not under attenuated. It's definitely dry. Not a whole lot of the sugar sweetness to it. There's some malty sweet, but it's barely there. There's more of that, again, that distinctive lager, a little bit of sulfur, and there is more of a grain in this taste than in the aroma. In fact, there's none in the aroma, but there's in the taste. And I'm going to give it another taste for this episode. And the thing I was missing that I just realized in the descriptors, the combination of that lager taste, that yeast character, and the dryness, there's a good crispness to it. I'd actually like a little more crisp. There's a little more body to this in the mouthfeel. It's not a heavy mouthfeel, but a little more than a lager than I'd expect. But it's still very good. Check it again. I do enjoy it. I would say I would like a little more crispness to it. The dryness is spot on. I'd like to get rid of all the corn altogether. Even though it's allowed in the styles, I don't necessarily like it in the beer. And I think I know where the problem for that lies. I think it all has to do with the boil, and that the Anvil at 120 volts doesn't get up to a very rigorous boil. So I think if I ever do this again, and I am going to do a lager again, I actually have a lager planned, a couple of lagers or styles like that planned on the calendar. I think I'm going to go a full 2-hour boil, which normally is suggested for 90 minutes, but to make up for that lack of super aggressive boil that I can get from gas or even from 240, I'm going to add another 30 minutes onto it and see what happens. I think that's the only thing I would change from this. Other than this, maybe, actually I take it back. I might add another malt to get a little more grainy flavor out of it, a little more biscuity flavor. But that's a nitpick past the changes I'd make. In fact, if I were to make a change on this recipe, the first thing I would change is the boil time. Maybe the yeast. I'd like to use a liquid yeast on it, but this yeast was fast. I mean, I have never, not even an ale yeast, maybe a Quebec I've had faster than that, but not a ale yeast. This yeast was so fast. So I might try this yeast again and just increase that boil. Just make sure I want to do that. Yeah, that's what I want to do. All right, that is it. I'm going to go ahead and spare you watching me drink the rest of this beer. I will say thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Click the like button. whatever the YouTube kids say to do, please do that. Subscribe is a big thing. I'm trying to get the subscriptions up in order to do some live events with the Anvil. More Anvil Brewing is right behind this. I have some more episodes ready on deck, and I got a special kind of an unboxing, not a traditional unboxing, but what I was able to do with the equipment I have of another piece of gear that I think a lot of homebrewers are going to be interested in. So you don't miss that, please subscribe. And that is it. I will say one more time, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next episode.